What I wanted to do this morning to begin is just simply tell you a story. And the story goes something like this. Years ago, a gentleman asked to see me to talk about his daughter's upcoming wedding. And he was very distraught, to put it mildly. His daughter did not want to be married in the church. In fact, she refused to be married in the church. She wanted to be married on the beach near the hotel where the reception would be held. Now, this gentleman did not seem to understand why his daughter felt that way about getting married in the church. After all, he told me, he thought getting married in the church was pretty important. But you know, his daughter had not really been to church on a regular basis for years, let me be honest. With the usual exceptions of Christmas, Good Friday, and Pascha, and the very occasional Sunday, maybe 3 or 4 times a year at best. Now, why? Why was that the case? Well, once she was old enough to play soccer and other sports, and games, especially here in Southern California, are being played most every Sunday morning, her parents placed her soccer games and her other sports events as a higher priority than attending the liturgy. In fact, her father coached several of her sports teams throughout the years. And then, of course, she went away to college. And then after that, she was still away, but in another city, and she went to graduate school, both out of state, with no connection to the church in those cities. So what do you think? What might the problem be here? So if we only bring our kids to church a few times a year, why would they ever think that Christ and the church are important? So let me tell you another story. This one is much more personal. This one is about my father. Many of you know that my father was a fireman. And firemen, certainly in those days, and I still think they do, worked 24-hour shifts. So my father was in church with me every Sunday morning he was not working. And when he worked on Saturday and came home on Sunday morning, my mother and I were dressed and ready to go to church when he arrived. Now, my dad changed out of his uniform, put on his suit and tie, and then drove us to church as a family. The only time I remember my father ever missing church, when it was possible for him to go, was after he had been out all night at a 13-alarm fire the night before, and had, as they say in the fire department, eaten a lot of smoke. My mother entered the bedroom after he came home and went into the bedroom to change clothes and found him still in his uniform, sprawled across the bed, sound asleep. There was no way he was going to wake up. So you have to understand also, when we went to church in those days, the service was entirely in Greek, which meant, of course, I understood in those days virtually nothing. Now, my father would pick up the liturgy book in the pews, put on his glasses, and follow the liturgy in English, and also a little Greek. He made the sign of the cross. He was reverent. He knelt. He prayed. He bought candles and had me light some of them. At 5, 6, 7 years old, I watched him intensely. And this is what I learned. To be a man, Jesus is important. Church is important. Being Christian is important. Being an Orthodox Christian is important. Now, once, when I had finished seminary already, when I had already been ordained as a deacon, and while I was working on a PhD in theology in New York, I went to St. Louis to visit my parents. And my father was driving me to church early one Sunday morning before Athos so that I could get prepared for liturgy. And we were talking as he was driving, and he said to me in a very matter-of-fact way, "You know, son, sometimes when I'm in church, I just feel the liturgy in my bones. Did you get that? In his bones. He felt the liturgy in his bones. The liturgy was in his bones. Now, if I were to be asked, I would say one of the reasons, though not the only reason, I'm a priest today was the steady witness my father gave me as his son. Now, why am I telling you these two very different stories? If you look through today's bulletin carefully, one of the things I hope you noticed is that Sunday church school will begin on September 18th. This is a public service announcement. Okay? Please sign up your children and bring them to church for liturgy and to church school and on time. For God's sake, on time. You get your kids to soccer practice on time. You get your kids to school on time. Everything is on time except Jesus. Why is that? Why is that? It's because we really don't think it's as necessary as school or soccer or anything else. But it is necessary. People tell me all the time that they're hoping with sports their children will get a scholarship to college and maybe even go on and be professional athletes. Do you know what the odds are that any child will be a professional athlete? You know what the odds are? Like 0.03 minus 47 or something. It's like infinitesimal. Do you want to know what the odds are? Your child will one day meet the Lord Jesus Christ when he dies or she dies, whether he or she wants to or not. 100%. It's 100% for all of us and for our children, for our grandparents, everybody. Now, I have to say, people always ask me, Father, how can we keep our kids in church? That's a constant refrain I've been hearing for 45 years. You know the old saying, just showing up is half the battle, right? So maybe we would say, as Christians, just showing up and bringing your kids for liturgy and church school, that's maybe a little bit less than half the battle. It's not even half the battle. Because I think what you need to understand, and we need to see things clearly here, the very first thing all of us need to realize is that raising our children as Christians today is a countercultural act. It goes against the grain of every form of media, practically, that our kids consume constantly. Raising our children to be followers and disciples of the Lord Jesus has to be intentional and deliberate on our part. Now, a number of years ago, a national study on youth, young people, and religion was done, asking just that kind of question that so many people ask. How can we keep our kids in church? How is the faith passed on from one generation to the next? A massive amount of data was collected. Sociologists found that there were three main reasons young people, statistically, stayed in the church. I'm just going to talk about the number one reason today. The number one reason young people stay in church, the study said, is because the parents themselves are faithful believers. Let me repeat that. The parents themselves are faithful believers. In other words, the parents are in church for the right reason, the Lord Jesus. And here's the quote from the study. The young person's parents practice the faith in their home and in daily life, and not just in public or churchly settings. Now, what does that mean? It means a lot of things. It means that the Christianity of the parents is not just a public face, not just a mask that's on display for Sunday mornings. Rather, it is the backbone, the structure of their whole household and their parents' lives together as a couple. And they practice that faith at home because they, as parents, know how much they personally need the Lord Jesus. Now, I'm going to tell you another story. A number of years ago, a young man in his late 20s came to see me. And he said to me, because he was not connected to the church at that time, he said to me, "Father, my parents don't really go to church anymore, do they?" And I said, "Honestly, no, they don't. But they were in church every Sunday when I was living at home, right?" I said, "Yes, every Sunday they were here in church." He said, "But they stopped going when I went away, didn't they?" "Yeah, they did." "So would you say, Father, that they were really only coming to church for me?" And I said, "Well, there might be a little more to it than that, but that's basically right. They were coming to church to get you to church." That's a very important distinction we need to make. The distinction is this: you have to come to church because you know you need Jesus. And you're bringing your kids because you know that they need Jesus also. But you need Jesus above all else. And that is really an important distinction. If you come to church just for your kids, it's not enough. It's not enough. And they figure it out, by the way, just like that young man did. They figure it out. So parents who are into the life of the church, who practice the faith themselves, who know and understand how much they need personally the Lord Jesus, what should take place in the home? The parents pray at home with their children. They read the scriptures at home with their children. They have icons and a prayer corner that they actually use at home with their children. And the parents, they're struggling to live their faith with integrity. They are loving and kind and gracious and true as people to the best that they could possibly do. And their faith is integrated into their lives at home, yes, but also at work, with their neighbors, and everywhere else. St. Porphyrios of Mt. Athos, who was recently canonized not too long ago, he put it this way: what saves and makes for good children is the life of the parents in the home. Parents need to devote themselves to the love of God. Parents need to become holy in their relationships with their children through their meekness, their patience, and their love. Parents need to make a new start every day. As a parent now of grown children, I can tell you, I needed to make a new start every hour, okay, with my kids. Every day, a new start with a fresh outlook, renewed enthusiasm, and love for their children. And the joy that will come to them, the holiness that will visit them, will shower grace on their children. He goes on and he says this: when children grow up in an atmosphere of freedom and at the same time are surrounded by the good example of adults, they are a joy to see. So, St. Porphyrios asks, this is his question: what does your child see in you? How do you live? Does Christ radiate in you? That is what is transmitted to your child. And this, he said, is where the secret lies. He says, we must see God in the faces of our children and give God's love to our children. Children should learn to pray. And in order for children to pray, they must have praying parents. It will not be necessary for the child to undergo great travail as it grows up if they learn how to pray and trust God. Excuse me. Here's another quote from the study I mentioned earlier. In terms of faith being passed on from one generation to the next, what the young person observes in the actions and daily life of his or her parents is the most decisive element by far in transmitting that faith to their children. Now, one of the major findings of this national study on youth and religion, a point that was brought out very clearly, is that American teenagers are actually very good at practicing the faith that their parents teach them. Not what the parents say they believe, but what they actually believe as evidenced by their actions. So, the takeaway is the authentic faith of one's parents is still the most important factor in a young person's spiritual development. You, parents, grandparents, uncles and aunts, but godparents are absolutely key in your children's retention of the Orthodox faith. So again, let me ask you. You see Eve Tibbs sitting over there? She's the director of the church school program. Go and sign up your kids today if you haven't already, or go online when you get home. Sign up today. Even that, and I've said this to you before, even that is no guarantee. Even that is no guarantee. But it is at least a real step in the right direction. And it's not teaching your kids that church is less important than a soccer game. So, God bless you. Please bring your children to church so that they understand and know who Jesus is. Good morning.